Well, do you still want to go over the questions that Craig had, the rest of the questions, or do you want to throw something else in there, Brendan?
No, I'd be happy to go through the rest of the questions, and then we can talk about anything else. And I've got a few ideas about what we could discuss. I'm happy to go longer than 20 minutes if people want to hang around.
So we've done
yes.
the first one, which was explain the reasoning Lycurgus uses in justifying the appointment of the 28 senators, and then we discussed sort of Plutarch documents one of Lycurgus's measures taken against luxury. So we haven't talked about the Vestal Virgins. So does anybody want to chip in about the Vestal Virgins?
Leslie, you had a really great answer to that in your responses. I wonder if you wanted to jump in.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thought it was kind of to balance the feminine with the masculine, to help temper the warlike and aggressive tendencies that everyone had. Although it was interesting that Numa's policies only lasted throughout his lifetime, like 80 years, and then it failed. And I thought his religion and his policies were quite good. I'd rather live under his policies than Lycurgus's policies.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I thought it was quite harsh in the respect of like 30 years of chastity, and then if they did actually do something, God forbid they did something wrong, then they were buried alive. So I think that was quite a harsh penalty, to be fair.
Well, it wasn't even if they did something wrong. If they were violated by force,
then they were still buried alive. Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, interesting, because I mean, what was their job? It was to kind of guard the temple of Vesta, wasn't it, to keep the sacred flame alight? So it's interesting you say that, but they were very different. Solon and Lycurgus and I can't remember the other one, but yeah, they were extremely different in the ways that they put their laws out there and how they expected the citizens to actually behave. So I just thought that was an interesting one.
Actually, what I wonder about with Lycurgus and the Spartans and the Helots, did the Helots remain slaves under the Spartans for that entire time period?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
they tried to revolt a few times, and every time they were very violently put down.
Yeah, whipped.
And there was one interesting comment in one of the stories. I don't remember which one, but someone was talking to the Helots about, don't you sing and dance? And they basically said, oh no, the masters don't like that. It seems like they lived a very tough life under the Spartans, and they symbolically declared war against them every year so that everyone knew that these were subjugated peoples that they could treat in any way they liked. It was pretty rough. Sorry, go ahead, Diddy.
Well, they discuss the meaning of closing the gates of the temple of Janus as well. Closing the gates of Janus, yes. A symbolic gesture.
So Numa built the temple, or had the temple built, and it was the closing and opening of the gates was to signify when Rome was or was not at war. So when the gates were closed, there was peace in the empire, I think is the way it worked. And for his entire rule, the gates were closed. And then basically almost immediately after he passed away, the gates were opened and it was war for the next 4 centuries. And then they were briefly closed again, and then opened again almost immediately. And they stayed open, I think, until Nero was the emperor.
And Nero destroyed Rome, didn't he, really, at the end of the
basically.
Well, because he was quite decadent himself. He was a bit more of an artisan and liked to yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll cover. I think
he killed his mother and stuff as well. I mean, he killed his lover and his mother, didn't he, Nero?
Yes, he did. Killed his mother in a pretty nasty way, like plotted the whole thing, and yeah. When she actually survived the initial attempt, and then I think this is the story. So he planned a thing where there was a big lead weight in the roof of a boat, and at a certain point it dropped through, destroyed the bottom of the boat sank, and then he sent soldiers to make sure the deed was done, and they killed who they thought was his mother, but it wasn't her, and she swam to shore and got back to, I'm not sure if it was her house or someone else's house, and then he sent soldiers in to finish her off.
Nice boy.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was a real piece of work. He would dress in regular clothes and run around and start fights with people, and if they fought back, he would reveal who he was, and basically he'd be followed by a group of
soldiers,
guards who would come in and kill that person for striking the emperor.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like a slight abuse of power.
Well, I guess that's the folly of empire and this kind of hereditary handing over of ultimate power, is that you risk giving it to somebody who is not prepared and not well suited, and they can turn it into something very ugly. But you have other emperors who got the same power in the same way, who really did a great job and made Rome really great. And yeah, it's just an interesting context.
It makes me think.
Interesting contrast.
Go on, Ruth.
Makes me think about a point that. Sorry, Ruth, do you want to ask something or input?
Well, I was just going to say, before we kind of move on from it, I was going to say it's weird that we look back at these really brutal civilizations for stories to guide us morally and ethically. But then contrasting with that, though, if you think about it now, this horrible man Nero was just killing his own mother or whatever. But now, world leaders can kill millions.
Yeah.
So to say that we're somehow better behaved people or more moral or ethical people is probably not even vaguely true, because at least they're killing one person at a time.
They do it in different ways, that's all. Whereas you would have an army with a sword and it would be quite brutal. They do it in different ways. Yeah. So, yeah.
Arguably, if they had the population in the world those times and the reach, would the same people be killing millions in their time if they had the reach, the technology and the reach? Or would they be doing worse or less than the rulers which you mentioned?
They were so much fitter and stronger, though, which is also another thing as well, because obviously they didn't have, they had chariots, but a lot of the time they had to walk around, and they had to walk around with massive, heavy shields and spears and swords, and so they were physically a lot fitter than we will ever be. You look at your gladiators and people like that, they fought lion, they were put in colosseums and had to fight lions and things, but they were strong people, so they could march 40 miles a day, no problem. Whereas we can't, you don't have that many people these days that can do that, because the technology has made us weaker within ourselves. That's how I see it. So that's where you look at they kind of look at different ways of how to rid the planet of people. But we are weaker as a human race than we were before. That's what I think. I don't know how anybody else thinks. Go on,
Kevin.
One of the things that's interesting is I was actually thinking about this when they're talking about Caesar and all this, is that the world population has actually exploded recently. And back then it was actually really, relatively speaking, really low. And I was trying to pull up some figures. I don't know exactly what it was, but, at 200, the year 200, it was about 190 million. is what it, so that's like a third of the population of the two-thirds of the population of the United States now was the whole world. Kind of interesting to think about.
Is that, how do they know? So that you're saying that South America, Africa, also the Roman world and North America at that time?
That's what I mean. Again, I just did a quick Google search, so I don't know, but I do know that it has exploded hugely since the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, that's the last 200 years or so, isn't it? It's interesting though, because actually then you think this is why the armies went out to conquer. They went out basically to explore what was beyond their own knowing, and they wanted to find out. But every time they came across somebody new, they didn't go, hello, handshake, how are you doing, let's all have a jolly good old time. It was slaughter, slaughter, slaughter. And that's what I found, because you're right. I mean, like, if there was 170 million people on the planet at that time, you got a lot of nice, beautiful world all to yourself. But as soon as they met somebody else, it was just, goodbye, you're going, we're going to kill you off. So it's interesting that we survive the way that we have, and we are the numbers that we are, to be fair.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, we're more tolerant now of differences than at that time in ancient times. You're different, let's get rid of you, let's belittle you, let's enslave you. Now we're a lot more accepting, almost to the point where we have to dial it back a little bit.
I would slightly disagree with you there, Leslie. I would say that the laws that we have are written for tolerance, but in the last decade or in probably 20 years, we've become very, very intolerant as a society, and the laws are now starting to walk back on a lot of that tolerance, and we're starting to, especially when you look at what's happening in America, they're saying that the remedy to the racism that everybody faced in the last, 100 years ago is now a different type of racism. And
more racism.
Which is kind of crazy.
And there are.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, there are laws for thought crime. I.e., the other day in Britain, there was a lady arrested for silent praying because literally she was in a buffer zone. So she was arrested and charged, but she was silently praying in her head. So this is where the 1984 and Brave New World come into play, is like, actually, like you say, the laws are they worse?
Yeah, and
in that respect.
There's also that football player, remember in Texas, I think it was, where he would go out on the field and have a silent prayer, and then they fired him and he took it to the Supreme Court and he actually won.
Well,
so at least it's a little win.
Yeah, there was a time, I mean, because there was a time, I mean, in this country, I know it's probably the same everywhere else, but if you were in a court of law, you had to swear on the Bible that you would tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So it's interesting that, I mean, what if they were Catholic, were they, the Romans, Roman Catholic, Christianity, etc. So before, I don't know, before the Pope and everything, people were probably just free to think and feel what they wanted. But at the time the Catholic Church came in, then that's where all the lawmaking and everything kind of to be in its own.
Just to add in, before Catholicism came to Rome and stuff, they had the whole Roman pantheons, and they were still very brutal. They were still like, no, you have to worship the gods in a certain way, and there were more sacrifices and things like that. Yeah. And then the adoption of Roman Catholicism, everything happened. Obviously after Jesus.
You're saying that, thinking about South America, because it used to be human sacrifice that they would do to the gods, whereas I think Christianity is like lambs and things like that. Yeah.
Would you guys say that lawmaking or education creates more of a foundation for civilization to succeed, or not? Or which one's more important, lawmaking or education?
I would say it's a chicken and egg problem. Like you're never going to get a good lawmaker who hasn't been well educated.
Yeah.
You've got to have a good understanding of a lot of different aspects of all types of things to create good, just laws.
I was just going to say it might have to be just an iterative process, like lawmaking and then education, and hopefully re-lawmaking. Like, because in any case, if you had perfect education, one would hope lawmaking would come of it, but maybe it wouldn't, and vice versa, I would think. So it seems like in human history, we're always just cyclically and
it's interesting that lawmaking, we think of it as something that's always happening, but really there's only a few times in history where whole new sets of laws have been created, and so there's two great examples in this book, which is Lycurgus and Numa, who were both asked recreate our society from scratch, because we know that the way we are running things is toxic. We know that there's no future if we continue down this path. So please give us something new so that we can move forward and be together as a people and be united, because otherwise we're going to tear ourselves apart. And the best example of that, I think, in recent history is probably the American Constitution and how that was written. And I'm doing a course on the Federalist Papers that's available for free. Very, very interesting how that all came about. And, they very closely analyzed all of these previous times that this had happened to try to come up with something that didn't have the weaknesses of the previous systems that were created.
I feel like education comes first, because Lycurgus and Numa, they traveled, learned from the other countries what worked, what didn't work, and then brought it back and said, okay, this is the way we're going to set up our laws, and let's give it a go.
That's what I was going to say. I think if they're people who have actually been out in the world and experienced other cultures and seen more than just, their own city, then I think they are educated enough to understand what laws work and what laws don't work. But I think if they're restricted to their own city, then they may not be the best people to be lawmakers.
Yes, and Solon was well known for having widely traveled. He went to Egypt, he went to Asia, he went all around the known world at the time, and he put the best of what he'd seen, plus his own ideas into the system of courts that he created. And while the system of courts and of justice that he assembled didn't stop the form of government that they had from seesawing between democracy and tyranny for another several hundred years, that system of judging each other stayed in place and is really the model of the jury system that we have today.
Even
so
though
I thought that was pretty interesting.
So something I want to bring up then on this point as well is like something I mentioned years. We haven't discussed it in years now. How Bitcoin, the technology, not only obviously it's a financial change, but it also
you had to use that word in here today, Joel.
Oh, I know. But the blockchain technology, but the technology also brings about the opportunity to make a change in education, as we know, and also not in creating new law as the typical crypto boys think, but in enforcing current laws and polishing the laws off so they are better adhered to and formed. And I wanted to bring up that topic and to see if anyone has any words on it. I'm going to be back in 2 seconds while you continue discussing.
Well, I suppose that comes into being able to moderate the abuse of law as well, really.
Because that's a really good point, Diddy. Yeah.
Not just the abuse of law, but the abuse of how laws are created and creating laws that favor certain people or industries over others. I think we have a real opportunity with this technology to create laws that exist in a much more live format. So rather than being written on paper and put in an archive and really being a little bit inaccessible, we can create laws in such a way as that they're available to everyone, and it's very visible who
evidence-based
voted and exactly.
Yeah, this sounds like a horrible idea on the face of it, but you just hear me out for a sec. What if we were to create an AI that basically is coded up with all our laws and regulations and ethics, and it could then go through these very long documents that they often produce for, you know, trade agreements and God knows what, that sort of impose all sorts of spurious laws, and it could read through it and flag up all the points where it contravenes law or contravenes our code of ethics.
Yeah, I mean, it would help with,
and, you know, thereby get people to write part of the document faster to be able to, you know, because a lot of the time, you remember with the EU, with the TTIP and stuff, the members of the MEPs never even got to read the document. They weren't allowed, they had to go into a room with no phone, and they could only stay there for a couple of hours, you know, and read it one person at a time, you know.
I was thinking about American Congress, actually, because there was one where Pelosi, and it was like 1,000-page document, 1,000 pages of the document.
Right, nobody reads it.
No, exactly. And they only had, again, it was like a limited amount of time to, it's like, well, it's impossible.
It's like
you
6
can't
hours.
go through this. Exactly. So yeah, you're right. If you had something that could do that and flag up, well, this,
this is breaking the law and that's breaking the law. And
then it would, you can then, you know, in that short period of time where your MEPs or your senators and everybody else can, okay, well, look, you know, it's been looked at. It's
picked apart, albeit by a machine. I mean, it can't do the whole job, but it could like give you some really good.
At the moment, they can get away with doing anything and anything because there
they
is.
They can put anything in there, and it's so hidden.
Yeah.
I would, you know, if it was up to me, and it's not, and never expected to be, but I would change the system so that the laws had to be short enough that they could be read within a particular period of time, and the people who are in the Senate who are voting on the law would have to sit there and listen to it. Yeah. And if it took longer than you know 5 hours or whatever to read the whole thing, then it wasn't valid as a law. Because you know, if you create this thing 1,000 pages long, you know, who knows what's in it, and who knows how to judge against it, because a judge is never going to read these thousands of laws that are thousands of pages each. It's ridiculous to expect justice to be upheld when nobody understands what the rules are. That exactly.
Well, like the TTIP, for instance, was making it so that business corporations could basically sue governments for potential loss of earnings, and they had their own courts, so they didn't have to do it in the formal court system. They had their own corporate court, which couldn't be overturned and couldn't be, you know, superseded. And that was all written into a fucking trade agreement. Sorry to swear. But you know what I mean? Crazy. It's not even like it's legislation that's in any, you know what I mean? It's sort of almost off the books because it's in a trade agreement where people don't expect there to be loads of law breakings and, you know, basically making people's lives miserable.
I can't remember who said it, but there was definitely something written about when law gets to be, there are so many petty laws that it's just, you know, you just literally can't breathe anymore. Then that's when
society, death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
It's I'm going to just say something on that point as well. It's the cycle of things being anon. Yeah, I can't say it now. Anon stuff and things. Sorry, my dog's creating chaos in the background. Sorry about background noise, right? It's when things are anonymous and become corrupt, it creates a cycle of creating more regulation to contain that corruptness and whatever's anonymous. And then every time you create more regulation and such, it creates more room for parts of that regulation and people involved to become corrupt again. So you're creating layers of regulation and layers of opportunity for corrupt things to happen.
Because you never get to the actual
Yeah, well, you just
Or-
kind of keep sticking band-aids over the crack type of thing,
Mm.
but the crack is still there. But if you create I think you were discussing, I was still listening while my camera was off, was how you can polish up the legal system and make things more streamlined. And then that's the case of like cleaning up the crack. If things are more transparent and such, and then you can do away with regulation, can do without regulation, excessive regulation, because you don't need it. If things are transparent and open, and I'm just going to quiet my dog down.
It's kind of working against the system as is, though, because the way I see it lately is that the rules are made basically to favour the corporations. So, you know, essentially, you've got to get that under control before you can get anything else under control.
It's almost like you need to go back to the root course of common law and then just start all over again and get rid of all these petty laws and actually look at go, right, okay,
really.
well, we've got our basis of common law. We know where that is, or the constitution, and let's get rid of all these petty laws and let's just start again with actually things that make more sense and that actually, you know, are more equal and work. Yeah, and don't favor corporations. Yeah, you know,
We don't want to use the word equal, did he? Just.
Okay.
Not equal.
Okay.
Craig will smack you.
Okay.
That's a good sort of point to stop on for a minute. You know, what is virtue, and how can laws be created that promote virtue? And because at the moment that's not what's happening. Laws are being created to basically prevent people. Sorry, Archie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me try to jump in. A couple. I think I've heard the word system thrown out there quite a few times. As you guys are talking legal systems, and I think governments are systems a lot, and what the founders of the U.S. were trying to do. But I think one of the things Bitcoin did so well, Craig did, is the incentives in the system. I think it's what the founders were trying to do. Is the people who have power and control over the system, you know, what incentivizes them, you know, to act in certain ways. And I think they were trying to design a system where the people who we invested the power in were incentivized to work, to act justly.
For the good of the people. Yeah.
I mean, that's what the Bible was, wasn't it? It's like basic instructions before leaving Earth. And most of that is actually trying to teach you to sort of be virtuous and moral and decent and, you know, think critically about life itself. And, you know, I mean, there are phrases in the Bible about, for example, you know, God put all the seed on the earth and all the herbs on the earth to be eaten, but he didn't say anything about eating animals. You know, it's like one of those kind of things. It's like, if you follow the instructions, basic instructions before leaving earth, if you follow the instructions that are written out in the Bible, and you're supposed to be a moral, virtuous person who is going to go to heaven, you know, it's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Well, I think it's terrific that we've got Craig, who has coded morality into Bitcoin somewhat. I mean, that, you know, that strikes me. He's got his Protestantism in there. You know, the idea of having skin in the game, the idea of it being, you know, a constant competition. So, I mean, I think that's really super.
Yeah, an honest competition as well.
Competition.
You know, there's the one thing I love about Bitcoin is that you are rewarded for honesty, and we don't have a system like that in the world today. In most of the ways things work, the dishonest, unjust person who works around the system is the one who can gain the most. Whereas in Bitcoin, that is completely not the case. If you step out even 1 millimeter outside of the honest boundary, you're out.
You're done. And it rewards putting capital at risk.
Then I think also too, like talk about the Bibles, talks about original sin, and then knowing that to be virtuous, we have to be educated to be virtuous and act morally, but there's always temptation. And I think why the ring of Gyges, especially with power, I think can come times you're going to be tempted to act unvirtuously, and then understanding that people are going to be tempted when you build those incentives into any system, legal or monetary or whatever.
Well, that's like this TTIP. This is like the law of Gyges. It's a law that nobody's read except the people who wrote it. Nobody knows what they have to do under this law until they do the wrong thing and get hauled into some corporate court where...
Well, that's the TTIP all over, because even the MEPs weren't allowed to read it. Yeah. But they had to vote on it. And I think similar things have happened in America as well. Mm-hmm. All sorts of nonsense that goes on these days.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is why they don't teach you law in school, isn't it? They want you to break the law so that they've got criminals to...
Well, they do teach you law if you take the courses. I've been learning law since forever. Leslie, chime in a second.
One thing I want to say about Bitcoin, we like to say that as soon as it's on Bitcoin, it's done. It's honest and just. But all it does is record what happens, and it will record dishonesty as well. But it is up to us to find that and uncover it. But it leaves a record and a trail, as Craig says. Yeah. So there is a lot of dishonesty on a lot of these chains and all of this right now. And it's going to take time for people to be aware that they can go and look into it. But until we take that initiative, it's just going to sit there, and who knows when it will be uncovered. It's still up to us.
Yeah, I think it's really good point.
It's the core of the system. It's the entities doing the recording. They're the ones who there's no bounds for them to have any dishonesty in what they do, really. They must record the exact thing, or they're gone. So my hope is that
people commit crimes on Bitcoin, not the miners and anyone who's recording it, the recording of it is honest. That's why we can rely on it.
Exactly.
People can still commit crimes on it, and we'll still hopefully go get them.
I've got a question.
I just want... Go on, you ask the question first.
It's something that is recently, so we know about Celsius, yeah? I mean, do you know about Celsius? What Celsius was? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the judge ruled that the money that was given to Celsius by the customers belonged to Celsius. So
under their terms and conditions.
Yeah, so that kind of blows my mind. But in one sense, yeah, you've given away your property to somebody else, and they've promised you something, but they're not doing what they promised. But the ruling is, well, you've given it to them, so they don't have to. It's theirs. It's not yours.
What did they promise the customers, though?
A return on investment, wasn't
Interest.
it?
Well, they're just investors, aren't they? They're bank holders, basically.
So basically, they must have written something into their terms and conditions that said, if you give us your crypto, then we are custodians of that crypto. But actually, it's ours. We are not obliged to pay.
To be fair, it's exactly the same in banks. They work in exactly the same way. Any money that you've got in your account in a bank,
but as a customer,
it belongs to the bank now.
But as a customer, you kind of led to believe, well, this is my money. I've worked for this. I've been paid for it. This is my bank account. This is my money. I've earned it honestly, or whatever. So therefore, that should be my money. I've given you this to look after.
Yeah, but it's not how it actually works.
I know it's not. But I just wondered,
we're all just creditors, really.
The terms agreed to are as big as the laws in the Senate. No one can read them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the thing. There's so much of that goes on. And I was one of those gammons that voted us out of the EU. So apologies if you're pro-EU. But the reason I did it was because they've got a system in the EU where laws come in top down, right? So the not the council, whatever they're called, the
European Parliament,
chosen ones at the top, not the MEPs. There's a word I can't think of. They feed in the laws from the top, and then all of the member states of the EU agree to a treaty, so it all feeds into a document. Then it's all the countries of the EU agree a treaty, and basically then nothing can be changed unless all of those countries then agree to make a change to the treaty, which kind of never happens. So they can feed in like garbage at the top, but all the countries, it's like it's set in concrete then, because nobody can make any alterations to it without getting agreement from like all of the member states of the EU, which is, what is that now, like 25 countries? I don't know how many it is. Maybe it's 30. I don't know, it's a lot. And so, and if they do want to make a change, they have to have, I can't think of any words this evening, referendum. But then even when they've had their referendum, it doesn't actually change anything unless all the other countries have the same referendum and agree on the same result. So from my perspective, I just thought, whoa, this is like democracy's gone. It's gone, especially at the time they were pushing through the TTIP, which we have to thank Trump for cancelling, actually. And, you know, but I see the same thing happening now, because now we've got the WEF and the UN and making laws that our own governments have got no say in. So it's exactly the wrong way around as far as I'm concerned. Whereas Craig's got it right, because he's set the protocol in stone and said, yeah, no one's changing this. Now you have to figure out how to make this work. You know, you have to work within the rules.
You see, that to me is when it's abuse of the law.
They're using,
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
they're essentially saying, yeah, you have the right to vote these down, but we've made it so impossible for that to ever happen.
Right, that could never happen.
Basically, you're stuck in this now.
So you suckers who agreed to this, you're cooked, you're done.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, so many times this repeats in history, where you have this system of democracy where people think, oh, it's great, you know, we get to self-determine, and the first thing that happens is they turn it into a tyranny.
Yeah, yeah, but they've done it, turned it into a nice-looking tyranny with a nice building in Brussels, and nobody seems to realise it's a tyranny.
So, yeah, my question
well, not for the first 30 years anyway.
You're right.
Did they design it with that intent to take themselves, or do they genuinely, are they so conceited that they think that they can control the system best and they're really doing what's best?
No, it was in my research, I would come to the conclusion that it was designed with that intent over 70 odd years ago to take over.
Admitted it, didn't they?
Yeah, you know, it's been a long plan, and as Ruth said, it's really hard to change the laws. And the thing is, even if you had all the countries agreeing, there was some kind of push, they have even extra punishment to countries because all the countries are in debt to like the World Bank and such, and there's a constant flow of money. They have this extra punishment of, if you don't do what we're saying, and then you're not going to get any money. And your country's going to go kapooey, and then you're not going to get welfare money and all this extra stuff, and then you're going to get kicked out of office, and we're going to get someone in who is going to comply. Or was Greece, not Greece, was it Greece or Cyprus? There's some years back.
It was both of them. I mean, Cyprus was first. Do you remember they closed the banks and confiscated people's bank account money? Yeah. And then Greece, they basically cancelled all the pensions and sold all the monuments, and you know, and all that stuff.
In India as well, they got rid of all the big notes, and I think they gave everybody 24 hours to literally take your big, you know, 5,000 whatever notes to the bank. And if you didn't do that, you know, that's it, you've lost.
It's gone.
You're not going to change it. It's gone. Yeah. So
another question is, I think Craig hit on there a couple of times too, is just, hey, living that life of luxury and we get comfortable. Is it the people's own fault, our own fault for allowing this to happen, because we were comfortable and we trusted all these people, our representatives, to do what's in our own interest? When I know the founders here, when they were writing the Constitution, were quite clear that, hey, this is, the system is designed to distribute power, and it's designed in a certain way to give power to people, but it's going to be on the people to maintain the system. Those are all.
Well, I think
and then one more thing real quick too, go back to Leslie's point of Bitcoin too. Hey, the system, once everything's on there, it's trusted, but hey, still people have to be moral and virtuous in what gets put on there. Because Bitcoin's just a tool, in the end, it can change the world, but it's still just a tool. And if we're not virtuous, then the tool can be used for bad.
Absolutely.
Can be used for good.
You could create this exact same thing that we're talking about in the EU and run it on top of Bitcoin, and it would be just as much a tyranny.
I want to add on really quickly to what Archie just said, and also to what Leslie said earlier. Archie said earlier about the ring of Gyges and such, and we could have a really virtuous person today. And Craig brings this up sometimes, like how he's doing what he's doing today and such. But what about the grandchildren and such? We could build the tools and everything to help the tools on top of the tool that is Bitcoin. And I think it's just Brendan was just about to say as well, is that how do we make sure that these tools keep on being used for good and the people have the good ethical reasonings to keep a civilization moral and virtuous into the future when we're all gone? Because we live in such an important time in history where this is our responsibility to make these things so that they can last into the future with the ethics and the morals. And there's I'm going to bring up just quickly, we mentioned earlier about how people used to be sacrificed thousands of years ago, and at the time that was morally acceptable. But I think nowadays, with our general education and philosophies we've learned from people in the past, we do have a decent handle on what is morally right and more virtuous. And the reason to abide by these things is because we live better lives as humans, and we also enrich the lives of people around us as well if we abide by these morals and ethics and such, which are deemed good and virtuous. But yeah, back to the original point is we can have a ring of Gyges, it can last a lifetime, but how do we, that someone might be actually morally good and do it well, but we can't rely on that in every generation. We have this amazing tool which will last past our generation, assumingly, if we do it right, if we do the jobs right, but we need to shepherd it and the philosophies and such around it so that it does continue to do good. And I'm bringing up that point of shepherding because, as we can all see, the last 10 years with shepherding of the whole cryptocurrency space led down a dark path, while we've all managed to rise above that and become shepherds, herding the whole Bitcoin space into a more virtuous path. And I think that's really at the heart of things. Go on.
Well, I just think it like these Plutarch stories, they're like thought experiments that have been applied to someone's life. So maybe they're true, maybe they're aberrations, whatever, good for the plot. But the point is that they're stories and they're narratives that teachers run a thought experiment and teaches a lesson. So I guess probably what we've got to do is come up with good stories, the right tropes, the right themes, and make them last into the future somehow. We've got to be Plutarch, right?
Well, that was an interesting thing that Craig suggested, is that maybe we need a modern version of Plutarch.
Yeah.
And so I started writing down a few of the different people who, we might consider putting in such a book.
I was thinking Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. They'd be quite interesting to contrast, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Because they're leading radically different led in Steve Jobs' case, radically different lives.
Trump, Biden.
Well, yeah.
I feel like we should restrict it to people who are dead, because their stories are not finished if they're still alive. So
yeah, I guess.
some of the ones I've got is so Genghis Khan could be contrasted with Hernan Cortez. Both great conquerors. One's kingdom collapsed, one's kingdom is still there today. There wasn't, I think there was 300 years between them. That was just, an interesting pair. You could look at other ones. William Wallace was a good example of someone who made a pretty big impact on history. If you want to look at, I don't, there's probably 100 good examples of counterpoints to William Wallace.
I'm gonna cut you one off. Do they have to be world leaders like that, or just revolutionaries too? Can you compare a Tesla, Nikola Tesla, or a Edison?
I have Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla on my list, so I think that's a pretty
Newton and Darwin.
But what Plutarch did is, they're all the people he compares, they're all sort of 500 years apart, and he picked people not who necessarily competed with it. So where there were people who competed with each other, he's got separate stories for them, and then he compares them with different people from hundreds of years before.
And maybe like a Gutenberg and an Alan Turing.
Yes. That's actually that's a great one, actually.
Yeah.
Leslie, can we get Leslie in playing before we go too far along?
Oh, I'm trying to remember what it was. I was going to ask, am I the only one who had a delay in noticing Aristotle's response to Alexander being a little backhanded? But I also, just to be fair, I was reading this is from 3 different translations of Plutarch. I have the kind that I carry on iBooks that's translated differently from this pamphlet. So it was different. I think it was this one where I picked up on it. I was cooking and all of a sudden it dawned on me. At first I thought it was kind of a dismissal, like, oh, he was trying to put Alexander at ease. Don't worry, no one's going to pick up on it. It's okay. And then I realized, wait a minute. I think he was kind of saying, I educated you well enough. This is what should be leading you, not just your conquest for power. You're not above it. So I don't know if anyone else had picked up on that. That was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting that Alexander kept the only copy that he had, and he slept with it under his pillow with a knife. Yeah. He was extremely protective of that document, and he didn't want anybody else to read it, because to him, it was the key to his ability to lead and to conquer. And Aristotle thought, we should get this out and have more people who think like you and are enabled by the information in this. But Alexander was very much about service to self. He only thought about making himself great. And I think the result of that is that his kingdom basically completely fell over as soon as he died. And, Craig is right to make the example of Genghis Khan. He was very much the same, all about conquering for the glory of Genghis Khan. And really what was left at the end of that was just a legend and nothing more. And Alexander is very much the same. As soon as he died, all of those territories he conquered just went back to being the way they were, because he was not able to project that influence beyond his own lifetime.
Well, that's what happens with the charismatic leader. Everyone follows the leader, and then the leader's gone, and then everyone's like, all right, now what?
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting the way Alexander handled Diogenes and Aristotle.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that one.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, one guy's living in the gutter basically, and he's like, oh, he's no threat. He likes me. We're fine. Or even if he doesn't agree, it's fine. But his one of his generals. But I also was thinking, is it pronounced Cletus? because I read all of this, so I don't.
Sure.
I'm not, yeah.
Yeah.
So Clytus.
Clytus, yeah.
Peter,
Clytus.
Clytus, it doesn't matter.
Could it have turned out? I wonder. Could it have turned out differently for him if he had maybe taken Alexander aside later and been like, "Hey, I'll let you get credit for this, but would this maybe be better handled where we're not mocking these guys? You're a better man than that. Take the credit." Could he have survived?
I think he knew what Alexander would do, and I think he didn't want to. You know, Alexander was basically sending him off into the wastelands to get rid of him, because he didn't want the free people of Greece who were still hanging around to be challenging him on anything that he did, and he was really one of the last ones there who did that, and he knew that if he didn't, you know, his life was just going to be a snowy hell until he died. And so instead he called Alexander on his bullshit and kept doing it and kept provoking him until Alexander killed him. And I think he knew that was going to happen.
Do you really think that? Like, do you not think that maybe just if he wasn't drunk, he would have reacted differently? Because he was remorseful of the fact that he killed him. So
yeah, but he was always drunk.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
I actually don't know if he was remorseful, like he felt guilt for killing him. I think he felt he was potentially going to lose power. Everyone tried to stop him.
You think that was why he...
Well, that's why, what was that? And Anazarchus, the philosopher, goes in there and he's like, "What are you doing crying here? You're a man of absolute power. Show him your might. Show him what you've got. You were right. Anyone who challenges you, they get what they deserve." And then he felt better and he got up. He's like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm good."
So you think for a moment he kind of felt human and he realized that he'd actually killed a friend and somebody that actually probably he shouldn't have done, but actually, you know what? No, it don't really matter at the end of the day anyway, because I am the great powerful leader and I can't be shown to have any vulnerability.
Yeah, I don't know if he felt guilt. Initially, I thought, oh, he's sad because he felt guilt, but the philosopher telling him, you know, you have absolute power. Anyone who challenges you, you got to do what you got to do. And then he was consoled in that. It says something.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Oh, yeah.
Maybe that just made him feel righteous in what he did. Not just that, oh, it's okay, I'm not going to lose power because I killed him, but the philosopher telling him that makes him think that, okay, that's his role. Anybody challenging, this is what should be happening to him, and that is the moral and virtuous thing to do. So I no longer feel guilt.
Yeah, you know, I think from memory, Clytus was a friend of his father's. So I think possibly some of that remorse that he was feeling was that he had really severed that last link back to his father. And not really, he never felt bad about killing anyone. You know, he killed a lot of people. And you know, one of the amazing things about, you know, and it was really an apt comparison between him and Caesar. They both led from the front, you know, in the battle. They were right there swinging the sword, you know, and him especially, like he was right at the front. You know, he was always, when they invaded a fort, he was the first one over the wall. And it's amazing that he didn't, didn't die 1,000 times. And really the remorse was not about killing someone, but about really severing that link and realizing that now he was completely his own man. There was no influence left from his previous life that wasn't completely bent at the knee before him.
That was his complete
and maybe
madness.
Maybe it was more like fear of what he had become through that act and not the act itself.
Interesting spin. Okay. What do you think? Do you think we should leave our discussion here? 15, 20 minutes?
I think that's a pretty good, 15, 20. It's a good 15 to 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Leslie, as well. It's really lovely for you to get more involved. I really love it.
It's really great.
Actually, as well. It's awesome you turned up.
Let me ask
one. Go on.
So I like to do trying to be a word baron on Slictionary. And then I always go on, but I wrote down a list of words. And that was Craig's class and everything. Do you think it'd be appropriate once it gets posted if I put like, hey, this list of words, and then put up bounties on them in Slictionary, and then put like on post on social media to say,
I think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's a brilliant idea.
watch this, and then go to find these 10 words or whatever that.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
That's a really
That'd
good
be very
idea.
cool.
Okay.
So everyone, this second part will be edited and uploaded as well, and made available publicly for everyone within a week or so. I encourage everyone to continue the conversations we've had in the Slack, and the next class will be in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks. As previously mentioned, we're hoping to get 2 classes done a month. So keep up with the reading and the questions, because this has been some excellent feedback and everything. I will get Craig to stay sometime for like the 15 to 20 minutes sometime to get involved with the discussion.
Sure. So I think
also, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the next book in the schedule is the Book of Job,
Book of Job. Mm.
Which is pretty.
I've got the book
interesting
list. Do you
read.
want me to repost the book list into the Slack?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in the Slack. If you just search week week 0.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I can just repost it as well. But yeah, it's a good point.
We shall double check with Craig that is next, because
Mine's been chewed
it's
by the
been a little
bird.
bit jumped around. But yeah, it should be the next one. But let's double check with Craig as well, and then we can post it anyway, and we'll double check afterwards. Looking forward to that one.
I strongly suggest, if we're going to move to a cadence of 2 per week, if you want to be keeping up, like, get going. So the Bible books are all reasonably short, but the Annals is quite long. And the Summa Theologica, which I haven't started yet, is freaking huge. It's actually two books about this thick, and there's no way I'm going to be able to read the whole thing before we get there. So, but I'm about halfway through the Annals at the moment, and looking at that. And I think a lot of the next books are very long, and so I think there'll be a chance that probably none of us will get to read the full texts before we are discussing them. So I think the best thing is just get into it. The Bible books are all very interesting. I had never read the Bible at all until this, so that's been pretty eye-opening. Some of what's in there, which is really interesting.
Oh,
all right,
everyone.
Yeah,
all right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again today. I think it's been a really wonderful session, and I hope you all got a lot out of it. And I look forward to the next one.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Bye.
Bye, everyone.